Title this World War II Part 4. This will be the response of the United States. All right, it's important to note, when World War II began, we basically were back into our isolationist ways. We were neutral, okay? A lot of this had to do with disillusion from World War I. Okay, we were angered because we basically didn't get anything out of World War I. We didn't get any land, didn't get any colonies, nothing. 260,000 American men died, and basically we didn't get anything out of it. So we weren't real happy. We thought the League of Nations was a joke, didn't have any power, and we never joined. We actually won't even sign the Treaty of Versailles. We'll sign our own treaties with those countries involved. So we didn't get into the League of Nations either. Okay, there was also issues over war profiteering. A lot of companies took advantage. Shouldn't say a lot, but some companies took advantage of the government during this time and made a lot of profits off the war. So this is gaining headlines, and this would be set forth by General Gerald Nye, Senator Gerald Nye, formed the Nye Committee to investigate these war profits, and this is becoming news as well. The war debts were not paid. Countries were not making payments on their war debts to the United States. So why should we get involved in another one? We didn't get paid back from the last one. We also believe that because of our location, we were geographically isolated, and at this time period we really were. There wasn't a lot of technology. We're starting to see the beginning of this with the planes and things like that, but we're going to see longer range submarines and those things. But we were pretty much isolated from everybody else. Europe was 3,000 miles away. Probably the biggest thing is we had our own problems. Okay, we're going through the Great Depression. Like many other countries, we were more interested in taking care of our own first. Okay, and we'll even see our government will pass Neutrality Acts that will make it illegal for us to choose sides. Okay, the Neutrality Acts of 35, 36, and 37 will make this basically illegal for us to get involved into these foreign affairs. Okay, we will. Part of this was the arms embargo. We could not export arms to warring nations. So FDR will actually find a way around that, called cash and carry. Okay, we couldn't export them, but if you want to buy them and come here to get them, then that's fine. We could do that. FDR saw World War II as an opportunity to perhaps lift us out of the Great Depression. Now, I'm not saying that FDR wanted the war, okay, but he did see the opportunity that lied within this. And cash and carry was a way that he could kind of finagle a way around those Neutrality Acts. Okay, we also restricted foreign travel during this time. They barred Americans from traveling on ships of foreign nations, and this is a direct response to the sinking of the Lusitania, the British ship, in World War I. Okay, we don't want that to happen. That was one of the reasons why we got involved in World War I. So we're going to try to ban foreign travel, or I should say restrict foreign travel for Americans. We see the America First Committee. Okay, there's their symbol. Here's a picture of a meeting, and you see good old George Washington right there, front and center. You got to remember what George Washington said in his farewell address when he was done with his presidency. Basically said we need to stay out of foreign affairs. Let's focus on ourselves. One of the main leaders of this was Charles Lindbergh. Okay, and Charles Lindbergh is speaking at this point in the America First rally. He'll head up that and basically said, don't worry about Europe, we need to take care of America first. Okay, he actually will go to Germany and receive a medal from Goring, who was the leader of the Luftwaffe, and because of his flight across the Atlantic and other things. And And he loses a lot of credibility for that, especially later in the war. Now, we'll see some movement away from neutrality, okay? In 1937, FDR renounces neutrality. And we'll begin building up our Army and Navy and airplanes. At this time, we did not have a separate Air Force. It was part of those other divisions. So he'll renounce that. He sees that we need to be prepared, and like I said, also sees a way to maybe get us out of the Great Depression, because with that will come more government contracts and jobs. 1938, we begin our Preparedness Program. U.S. government began to prepare the country just in case of a war. In 1939, we see those Neutrality Acts amended. Neutrality legislation is revised for the sale of arms and munitions, and that goes into that cash and carry provision, okay, which will obviously favor our allies. 1940, we traded Britain 50 of our old destroyers to lease naval and air bases in British possession. So we give them 50 of our old boats, basically, and for a promise that we can use their air bases or use their land for air bases and naval bases so we can extend our own reach. Okay, FDR sees a threat coming. The Smith Act outlawed the advocacy or promotion of foreign nationals, outlawed the advocacy or promotion of violent overthrow of government. Okay, so basically this is a way to watch our own foreign aliens here. It's also called the Alien and Registration Act. Foreign nationals had to register with the government. So now we begin looking into our own people and seeing, well, we have a lot of German Americans here. We have a lot of Japanese Americans. We have a lot of Italian Americans. Are they possibly a threat? So we start to look in this as well. Very controversial, as we'll see later. We established the Selective Service Act of 1940, which is the draft. Okay, basically ages 21 to 35 are up. This is the first peacetime mandatory draft law in U.S. history. Usually in the past, or always in the past, we had the draft after a conflict has already started, but now we're not involved in this, but we already have the draft, so we're building our army as quickly as we possibly can, and wanted to raise an army of several million men. Okay, and both of my grandfathers were drafted. 1941, we see the Lease Act. Basically, the U.S. had a vast supply of war material, and we'll start shipping them to the Allies. Okay, we become the arsenal of democracy. So we're going to start shipping goods to people that we support, basically to fight Hitler and Mussolini. Okay, including Russia. And you can see this monument, which still stands, of how we helped Russia, giving them airplanes and things like that. Even though, were they a democracy? No, they're communists. But we saw them as a way to stop Hitler as well. And we'll talk more about that as we go into this. With that being said, the President's going to provide aid to any nation whose defense believed is vital to the United States. Very important there. But that also means that our ships are in war zones now and could be sunk. So that's probably going to get us involved. And FDR knew that, okay? The Atlantic Charter in 41 is an agreement signed by Roosevelt and Churchill outlining our war aims. Okay, basically outlining how we are going to come into the war. And you see there's FDR and there's Winston Churchill, who is now the Prime Minister. He'll replace Neville Chamberlain as the Prime Minister, and Churchill has a whole different outlook. Okay, Here is one of those rare pictures where you see FDR standing. But if you look really close, you see him holding on to dear life to this soldier right here. So that's one of the rare pictures of where you'll see evidence of that. He's carrying his cane and things like that. You don't see too many of those. So that's one of those rare pictures that I told you about earlier. But basically, the Atlantic Charter is going to show us how, or decide how we're going to come in, okay? And we're going to take that leadership role. When we come in, we're going to be the leaders of the Army. We're not going to take a back seat to like last in World War I, we took a back seat to France and they let it. We're not going to do that. We're going to come in as the leaders this time. We'll freeze Japan's assets and set a trade embargo. Okay, we will stop supplying Japan with scrap iron and oil, and that will upset them and will lead to, obviously, Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 1941, Japan will attack Pearl Harbor in answer to this embargo, and we'll get into that major event later. Now, what about our industry? Okay, look at these numbers. I don't expect you to memorize these numbers, but let's look at those. Between 1940 and 1945, we see a 75% increase in our production. Okay, our GNP in 1939 was 91 billion. Look at this number. 1945, 215 billion. War. What is it good for? Business. And look at that money. 1940 we had 6,000 planes. 45, 60,000 planes. Total arms, 86,000 tanks, 17 million rifles, 296,000 planes, 71,000 ships. Okay, we're going to supply our allies with all these things, and it's because of the American people that did this. Here is a great poster. Stop this monster that stops nothing. Produce to the limit. This is your war. So we're going to beat them down with production. Okay, here's a woman. Rosie the Riveter right there. My grandma did some of that. The Liberty ships in 1940, it took 355 days to make a ship. Okay, a man named Henry Kaiser came up with a better way of doing this and knocks it down to 56 days. That's how fast we were doing this. 1944, we doubled the production of Germany, Italy, and Japan. Now, a lot of that is because of the war, and we're knocking out their factories, but still, we're doubling their production. That's how we're going to win this thing. Okay? Now, some other things. War Production Board. Okay? This will restrict production of civilian goods, place limitations. This is basically our rationing. The Office of Mobilization, created in 1943 as a federal agency that coordinated issues related to war production. So they're going to coordinate those things. Okay? The War Manpower Committee set up the draft, moved skilled workers where they needed them. Okay, people were moved town to town, factory to factory. The OPA, the Office of Price Administration, will set prices and rent, so it will prevent people from taking advantage of the situation. The Office of War Information. This is interesting to me. Basically, it's going to tell us what we should hear, approve what can be said on the radio, movies, and paper. It basically censored things. Okay, so we're having this stuff we have never seen. We can't relate to this. We're having our food ration. You can only have so much food at a time. You can only have so many pounds of meat, and you name it. And then on top of it, we're being censored too, because, like this poster said, careless talk costs lives. Mr. Hitler wants to know. So, things like your letters home would be censored if you're a soldier. You had to be really careful. You didn't know who was listening. Financing the war. Okay? Much like World War I, this will be mostly financed through bonds and taxes. Okay, there you go. A third of the taxes, 2/3 borrowed from those war bonds. That's why you see it on these, our own propaganda posters. Okay, by 1945, $49 billion bought by individuals. That's impressive. $400 billion spent on the war. Okay, even there's a comic strip. Labor relations, like we saw before, the AFL and the CIO promised not to strike. They set up the War Relations Board, and basically they're going to take care, make sure that we don't have those strikes. In 1941, they gave everybody a 15% wage increase and then froze everything until the war was over. That was their way of trying to get by with that. A difference from World War I, where they just told everybody they were frozen and then had to deal with the problems afterwards. 1943, the coal strike occurred, and FDR said, okay, go ahead and strike, but then you're going to be drafted. That strike ended quickly. And then excess profit tax will try to stop that as well. Try to stop those war profiteers. And then women in the workforce. Let's stop there, and we'll continue this later. Don't want too long of a lecture.